All right, another podcast from the Michigan Institute of Athletics in Brighton, Michigan. This is going to be a stellar podcast today. I'm super excited about this one. I'm joined by an old friend, and I just can't wait to hear his full story, although I know many bits and pieces. So right before we get into it, I want to shout out VetLife. VetLife is a 501c3 nonprofit company. It's a company of veterans for veterans. Every veteran faces difficulties when they transition from active duty back to civilian life, and VetLife is there to ease that transition. If you want to reach out to VetLife, you can do so through Instagram or Facebook, or check out their website at vetlifetoday.org. So without further ado, I want to introduce John Krzeminski. John, I know you've seen some of my podcasts. We've been friends for a long time. You're a jiu-jitsu student here at the school. You fought in the cage under SFS. You got a victory. 1 year anniversary, or no,
8 years.
Yeah, why did I say 1 year? It's an 8-year anniversry today, but today is the anniversary of your cage fight.
That's right.
I want to start this episode the way I start all my episodes. I don't want you to tell me about who you are now. I want you to take me all the way back. Where you were born and raised, what you were like as a young man, the things that were really influential to you growing up, or kind of your guiding light. What did you think the world had in store for you? What did your family think it had in store for you? And then we'll slowly build up to today's story.
Awesome. Before we get started, I brought you a little gift.
Oh, this is sick.
So I have to shout out when you're in a space of, so we can get into this in the podcast, but machining, we do a lot of prototype manufacturing. A friend of mine made those for you. He actually has the machine that does that.
I love this. This is extremely cool. I love that it is a circle. Like this, I originally wanted my table in my studio to be a circle because of the way that it speaks to the evenness of the conversation, the value that you bring to the table, the value that I bring to the table. I really love this. And Stacy had created me nice, Michigan Institute of Athletic ones, but really this is the evolution. This is awesome, John. Thank you.
You're welcome. So just to get started into my story, thank you, James.
Yeah, no problem, brother. Here, I'll trade this. Let's go.
I'm actually not from Michigan. I think you know that, but maybe a lot of people don't. I grew up in a community southeast of Buffalo, New York. So it's actually called the South Towns, extremely small farming type community. And, looking back, one of the things I was reflecting on is I never realized how poor the community was that I grew up in. When you're a kid, you just are used to what you're used to. And shout out to all my friends that are still back in Holland, New York. But in fact, it's funny because Holland is, there's Holland, Michigan, and you think about how big Holland, Michigan is. Holland, New York is super small. We do have a tulip festival. The biggest thing in the tulip festival at Holland, New York is what is the hardware store going to put in? They usually do some sort of funny float, small town stuff. And honestly, when I was growing up, I never knew it was a poor community. I didn't know that. And I remember one of the teachers in my social studies class in ninth grade, I was in high school, saying something about how Holland is a blue-collar community. And this is the first time that I really started understanding class dynamics and what that meant. I almost got offended by it. And I was like, what do you mean that Holland's a blue-collar community? And my dad at that point started his own business. He started his own company doing machining. He does a lot of prototype manufacturing and machining. And, he worked as well with my mom, kind of from that poverty state to a middle class, good quality of life and income. So it kind of offended me. I'm thinking, we're not poor. And then, I moved out to Michigan when I was 18 years old. And Detroit, and this might sound funny, seemed rich to me. Like the Detroit metro, everybody has these nice cars. And then I started realizing, I was like, wow, that really was a kind of a poor community. However, I actually, kind of backing up, I first moved out to Flint. So Flint, I went from poor rural to poor urban. And, when I talk about Flint and how poor it is, a lot of people look at it as that I have a disdain. In fact, it's the opposite. I love Flint. I I love that city. I love the energy, the grit. One of the things that I've always, and, something that I've said recently is when you were talking poor rural or poor urban, we really have the same struggle as far as you're just trying to live your life. And it's something that has offended some of my friends, but I've said this, is it's almost awkward now where, in these richer rural communities, middle class, white America, we get into this realm of trying to tell other people how to live. And, your garage door is the wrong color, or you repainted your house, or your fence is too tall, or something like this.
Homeowners associations.
There you go, right? But when I was, growing up in, either region, it was really nice that you just lived your life. Everybody wasn't concerned about what you were doing because they were too worried about what they needed to do. But yeah, I remember, so I moved out here to go to college at Kettering up in Flint. And I remember at 18 years old getting dropped off by my parents at the university. Never visited campus before I moved here. I knew that I was leaving that small town. It didn't matter what I was going to do. My mom even used to ask me, "Where are you going?" And I'd tell her Nebraska. And she goes, "What's in Nebraska?" And I go, "I don't know. I'll find out when I get there." But I knew that small town was not for me. I graduated with 99 kids. We were supposed to have 100, but one kid flunked out. I believe that was one of the biggest classes that town ever graduated. I think now they have about 60 kids per class, graduating class. But I was like, I'm out. I got to get out. So
I want to dig a little bit in your story before we go too quickly. Okay, so I completely understand because I had a very similar experience. I was born in downtown Philadelphia, and then we slowly moved to suburbs outside of the Philadelphia. And when I got older and went back and looked at my first house, I was like this thing is so small, but you have no perspective of that yet, because when you're born and raised in that environment, it's all you know. Your house doesn't even have a relative scale to what a house could or should be. You only think in terms of that's my home. These are my parents. This is our standard car that we drive. This is what my dad does for work. And I know what you were speaking of. It's like when someone suggests that your lifestyle is either lower class or, that you're blue collar, you're like, how dare you? What do you mean? But it's because you haven't really seen the world yet. You haven't had your perspective stretched to the point where you can go, wow, we are on the lower end of the scale. Why is that? Are we forced to stay in this situation? Is there something I could do about it? Can I change? Do I want to be out of this environment? Do I want more for my life? What does that look like? Do I deserve that? There's a lot of questions that would come up. So you had already known, it sounds like, that you were going to go to college, that you had to get out of that small town is what you began to say right there. Where did that drive come from, John? What were the ideals that you were striving for in life? What was the roadmap that your parents had laid out for you? Because a lot of kids, especially traditionally back in the day, grew up in a small town, fell into the same patterns of work or behavior that their parents did, and repeat the cycle over and over. They don't break free. If they came from let's say a poverty, class or a lower class family, they tend to just stay in that cycle. Now, there are plenty of examples of people that break free, but why is it that you knew that you wanted to escape it? And what were you striving for? What did you think John was going to be when you were going off to college?
So a couple things. First, even going back to your comment on where you live, right? The very first house I grew up in was actually a recently condemned house. So what happened was my dad got it on auction. And if Dad, I'm screwing up this story, it's close.
My recollection.
My recollection. And actually, he had to rehab it before we could move in, but it was what they could afford. And there was this old farmhouse. He rehabbed the house. But to your point, I didn't know anything, right? I remember, I make this joke is Tristan was telling me the other day, he's like, the size of your calves are huge. How do you get such big calves, right? And I said to him, I think it's from my childhood. And I laughed because the floors were always so cold in our house because we had old wood floors and we didn't have the heat very high. So I literally was always walking on my tippy toes. So I swear that's why I have big calves to this day.
Well, I'll tell you what, in Muay Thai, they literally practice walking around on their tippy toes to build the strength of their calves for their balance and their kick potential. Apparently, you were training Muay Thai at a young age without knowing it.
Exactly, just because I didn't want my feet to be cold.
Wow, that's hilarious.
So, but this is going to sound funny, but I've always operated, and you'll see this throughout my story, with kind of this chip on my shoulder. Like, I've got something to prove. I know I have something to offer this world. And whatever that is, I don't know. Maybe I still don't know yet, but I had to go out and find it.
This is going to be a huge part of your story. I can tell just by the way that you said those words. I can see the flame behind your eyes when you say those words. They're like, I knew I had value to bring into this life. I knew that something within me could provide something for this world that was needed. Do you have any recollection or any youngest memory of where that came from? Like, where did that chip come from? Because that is a driving force for so many successful people. But I'd love to be able to try to pin down, like, why do you have that when some people don't?
I don't know. And I don't know if it was because of the expectations of my parents. My mom was a teacher. My dad, started his career actually in engineering and then went into his own business. And, education was paramount within the family. Make sure you get a good education, make sure you get a good job. But, I remember one of my earliest memories of helping my dad in his machine shop. And I'm standing next to the lathe, and he's asking me to do math, okay? And I couldn't figure out it. So on a lathe, when you're turning a part, you take off. So whatever you're trying to take off, it's half on the dial because you're taking it off on both sides. Okay. So I'm trying to do math, and I'm probably 10 years old or something like this. And he goes to me, if you want to be an engineer, you got to know how to do math. And I think, even, putting, my dad was a hard father, but in a way where he wanted whatever better for his kids. Right. So I don't know if it was my parents and putting that education into me, but there was something about that childhood experience that said, okay, I can do this, and I have something more to offer than just working a 9-to-5 job.
Was your family religious? Was there any ideologies that were driving that force? Was there, I'm so fascinated by some people just have a flame in them that I don't see in others. And it's not that I don't think they have a flame. It's just like it was never ignited. It's almost like the ingredients are there for a fire, but it never got sparked to life. And some people, they get a flame that's just unstoppable. Was there any of that in your family structure?
So you know what I think it might be, now that you're kind of pushing me on this, is watching my dad live the life that he wanted to live through entrepreneurship. Because one of the biggest things that I think we lack is role models in entrepreneurship, because it's such a hard road. It is so hard. It's not for everybody either. But watching when we get into my businesses, one of the reasons I did it was I wanted flexibility with my family. I wanted to do what I wanted to do every day when I get up. I wanted to come and do this podcast, right? But it was, the ability to basically work your life the way you wanted it to, and without answering to somebody. And one of the things that, what's funny is, as you ask me this question, I remember a teacher in high school. So I had a 1970 Dodge Charger in high school. I still have the car. It's in my garage at home. I haven't had time to work on it. But
you need to restore that one day. A part of your story needs to be a beautifully restored, your original 1970 Charger to come full circle. You know how much you'd appreciate that thing now?
Oh, in the fact that I had that in high school, I mean, it is. So going back to high school was kind of a weird, and I'm going to go on a tangent here, James, but.
No, the best conversations, man, they bounce around, and I'm enjoying this, so please do.
So I was in this weird group of friends because I was kind of a smart kid. I was kind of one of the car guys because I had this 70 Charger. I didn't really fit in with the smart kids because then I was friends with the car guys, right? Or I wasn't quite a jock, but I was athletic. I didn't do sports because I actually ended up doing worked in high school. But, so I never fit in with any group. So picture this. This is pre 9/11. This is, a long time ago. I'm going to date myself. So I graduated high school in 1999. So that's how long ago this is. And
So you're like 42.
42, yeah. So final exams were happening, and back then they would just leave the front doors of the school open because it was hot. It was starting to become summertime at the end of the school year, and they would just let the breeze blow through the school. So I pulled my car out in front of the doors and did this big, huge burnout and just let the smoke roll into the school. And that was the only time, by the way, that I didn't get in trouble by my dad, because my dad did know about it, but he just didn't say anything about it.
There's the car guy in you. Man,
Yes.
Burnouts are a part of the car culture, especially back in the muscle car days. That's like how you establish dominance in your friend group. You're like, see that burnout I just dropped, boys?
In fact, what was funny about that story is my grandma lived nearby. So that night, I never knew this, but my dad got a call from the principal. And he goes, hey, let's go for a car ride. So we get in his car. We drive down there. And he goes, wow, somebody laid a really good burnout in front of the school.
John's like, wow, that's quite the coincidence.
Wasn't me. And he told me that years later that he knew. I never knew that he knew at that time. So anyway, one of my teachers pulled me aside the next day, and he goes, you're not going to make it in life if you have this type of attitude. And he goes, you are trying to get outside of the norm, basically. I don't remember his exact words, but it was like, you're not fitting. You're not fitting into society. And I kind of was looked at him, this now was my senior year in high school. I'm already had planned to move off, and I'm kind of looked at him like, perfect, because I'm out of here. But I don't know. It kind of was that, I always knew that I had something that I needed to offer, and I wasn't going to do it just going back to my common statement here, working the 9-to-5 type job.
What you just said is actually massive because you were a little bit of an outlier. Well, guess what? Entrepreneurs or visionaries or people that dream big, they tend to have that quality. They're willing to walk their own path. If you just go with the stream, you're going to go where the majority of people go. Majority of people do not go into extreme self-discipline and sacrifice and, trying to create a business from the ground up. That's not the norm. So it's like you were an outlier. And honestly, I was an outlier, and I took pride in that. And it sounds like you had that same well, good. Well, then I'm going to walk my own path. I don't want to go the path that 75% or 80% or 90% of people are going, because most people live a mediocre life. Not that I'm downing on it, but a life that I would not be satisfied with. I'm not saying that they're not satisfied. Maybe they're extremely satisfied with their 9-to-5 job that, they go somewhere, they collect a paycheck, they don't really have much say in their time or their flexibility. They get a certain amount of weeks vacation each year, and if they exceed that limit, they'll get fired and they'll get replaced. I'm not that's not okay to me, and I need more out of life than that.
And you know what? Maybe the better way to say it, and I actually had this conversation with both of my parents recently, is what maybe they taught me is they both pursued their passion. And my mom, even though she worked a quote-unquote normal job, she ended up ending her career at she was an administrator for kids with special needs like autism and things like that. And she loved every day of work. And I look at what most people do, and my parents were the opposite of what most people do as far as role models. Both of them pursued what they wanted to do with their life, not just working a job.
So you had an example right in front of you of people that were following their passion. So, what a perfect example to set for your children, because all parents, if they love their children, tell them, you can be anything. You can go do whatever you want. You can make this world your oyster. You can pursue your dreams. But it's if they didn't pursue their dreams, the kid's can I? How? I don't know how that happens. You actually got to see a real world example of your mother and your father that had passions, that pursued their path. And that just leaves you at the question, what is my passion? what do I need to bring to life? What would make me feel full inside if I was doing, right? And then that takes you down a whole separate road. Right before we go into your college, I want to ask you one more question. It sounds like maybe the answer was just your father or your mother, but did you have any heroes in your life growing up? Did you have any people or even ideals or things that you looked at and said like, wow, like that is an example of something great that I want to strive to be like? Because a lot of the times when we're young, we model our behavior after the people or things that we find to be worthy. And like some people do that through religion. If they see, like the teachings of Jesus, they go like, okay, well, this is what, I want to model my behavior after because that will provide value. Some people see that in sports heroes, you know what I mean? Some people see that in business entrepreneurs. Did you have any like heroes in life that you remembered thinking to yourself, like, I want to work to be like that when you were growing up?
It's a great question. And as you're asking the question, I'm trying to like think like what was it like back then, And one of the things that, and I'll get into this, and I'm going back to my age again. This is pre-internet, right? This is even when I was in high school, we had AOL, and for those that don't know what dial-up was like, it was Stone Age, right?
I wish I could recreate that sound. You
Yep.
know that sound when you'd connect to the internet?
So, and one thing about me in general is I was never into traditional sports. Even as you know me now, I love boxing, I love MMA, I love jiu-jitsu, but the traditional sports don't do much for me. So there was never a sports star that I looked up to. Later on in life, and this is actually going to sound weird, but like one of the reasons that I chose to go to the college that I did is I started looking at like CEOs, people that were like super successful, and most of the General Motors CEOs went to GMI. Kettering was GMI, and that's why I chose that college. So I wasn't looking at like, oh, Barry Sanders is my idol or something like that. But I was looking at, okay, who was successful in business, and those people I was always fascinated. Like even in my small town, like there was my dad's friend that was wealthier. It's like, okay, well, what did he do? So I was always intrigued by like what was making people successful.
Honestly, that makes perfect sense. And even though you didn't have one figure, you had a model. You kind of had like a prototype in your brain of what you wanted to be. And it didn't need to be an exact person. It was more of a lifestyle, a behavioral pattern, things like that. And you go, well, you know what? If these successful people followed this route, then that's the route that I'm going to follow. The last question I'm going to ask you about your childhood before we move on is growing up in, the environment that you did, going from New York to Flint. I actually think there's a lot of blessings and there's a lot of really good things that come from struggle. I think that some of the best moments in life come from some of the darkest places. Like this life is engineered in a way where most often you're introduced to your strengths or the characteristics that will carry you through this life in the hard times or the things that require more from you, not the easy times, not the comfortable bed. Growing up in that childhood, being in New York, being in Flint, are there any things that really stand out that have shaped you for life that maybe make you a better entrepreneur, a better father, a better husband, etc.?
This might be actually a surprising answer, but one of the things is enjoying the simple things. And one of the stories that I was actually thinking about the other day that popped in my head randomly this morning was, we're at this small farming community, right? And one of the things we used to do for fun is we'd race lawn tractors. Okay.
That's epic.
And I mean, literally, like we would soup these things up. They would do like 30 miles an hour. And I even made, like, when I say we had property, my parents had 20 acres. So like everybody just had property. It was in the country. So I literally made a racetrack in my backyard and would invite friends over and we'd race lawn tractors.
On like a lawnmower,
Like a lawnmower.
deck underneath it and you're zipping through.
Yeah, we would soup these things up. We would put different pulleys on them and things to make them go faster. I mean, these things were so sketchy. But we had so much fun. And one of the things, I think if I look at my childhood, my time in Flint, the simple things, and even in life, the simple things that you would just happen organically, where you're like I'll give you an example. Like I took my kids to Disney World once. And Disney World's supposed to be the happiest place on earth and all this, right? that is by far I mean, when you try so hard to make something like that happen, that's not usually the happiest time. I look back at those times when I was racing lawnmowers, and those were great freaking times. And I mean, it literally, James, like how would we get these? We'd go down the road and find people that were throwing them out because they were broken, and then we'd fix them and mess with them and race them. So I mean, it really didn't even cost us that much money. So then you're trying to like buy happiness nowadays. Okay, I'm going to take my kids to Disney World, or I'm going to do this. I'm going to buy it. It's not the same.
You are so accurate in the fact that like happiness is often right in front of you. You just don't recognize it as happiness until usually way after. And then that's why nostalgia is so strong for people, is they look back to simple times where they did feel great, where they were enjoying themselves, where they were happy, and they didn't recognize like, wow, that is it. It's funny. I got a message. This popped into my brain on my way in here to have this podcast with you. Danny Berry just bought his first home with his girlfriend, and he's got his dog that he loves to death. And all it was him sitting on his back porch with his laptop in front of him because he does website design. And, his dog was in the picture, and it was a sunny day, and Danny said, not a bad view, huh? And it hit me so hard, and as you're saying this, I was like, Danny gets it. That is happiness. Your happiness isn't these extravagant experiences. Those are distractions, and they can be fun, enjoyable, happy events. It's not that they can't be happy, but very often, your happiness is right in front of you. I was speaking to my cousin the other day online, and we were talking about some of our childhood memories, and some of my favorite childhood memories was like playing hide and go seek in my subdivision with a group of my friends where, one time we were at my elementary school, we were playing in that ground area, and one of my friends climbed on top of the elementary school as a hiding spot, and the neighbors called the police on us. So then the police were chasing us, and it was like the most fun game of hide and seek we ever had as kids, because it was like, now all of a sudden we're not hiding from the other team, we're hiding from the police. These stupid memories that at the time they're just like whatever. You're just going through life. When you look back, it can give you so much perspective about what actually brings you joy. You know what it is? Time with people that you care about, where you're a little bit carefree, you're in the moment. You're not living in your head. You're not saying, what do I have to accomplish tomorrow or the next day, or what failures, do I still need to fix from my past? You're just living. And if more people could get into the essence of that moment, you and I were discussing this at the coffee shop the other day about just being in the moment. Like when you're in this room having this conversation, just be in this room having this conversation. And the more you do that, the more that I really think it like gives you that fulfillment that you're looking for. Like, I have a good life, and now let's work to bring even more into it. I think we've gone off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I do think it's so important for people to understand that, like, often happiness is right in front of you. You're just not labeling it as happiness. You think that it's something that you are only going to find in the distance.
So I have a picture. I was actually going to bring it in, but I decided not to. But it's on my desk in my office in my house. And it's of me when I was a little kid. I was probably 4 or 5 years old. It's on this rusty tricycle. I mean, this thing is the shittiest tricycle that you'll ever see. But I had this huge smile on my face. And, I even look at that in some of the recent experiences that I've had. One of the happiest times that I've had recently was just going for a walk in a park. And it wasn't like, did that cost, that memory cost $0.
And honestly, this is the secret. Like, if you could put yourself to being 85 years old, you're on your deathbed, your material wealth is going to fade, or get passed on, or whatever it's going to happen. You're going to look at those moments where you were surrounded by people that you loved, or when you were at peace in your mind. A lot of times people don't realize peace in your mind is such a valuable thing. Or when you took your dog for a walk, or the time that you spent with your children or your loved ones, or, just those little seeing that picture of little Johnny on the tricycle that was rusted out. But you know what? That kid wasn't thinking about what color the tricycle should be, or that it should be a bike, or that he should have these things or those things. He was like, man, like, I'm living. This is awesome. That is such a perspective that if we could keep on the forefront, everyone would enjoy their lives more than what they currently do.
Absolutely.
So let's shift to your college stage, John. You go to Kettering. Tell me about if you can, take me back to the young man that's in college. What does life look like? You know, a lot of times people with a chip on their shoulder or a little bit of fire tend to get in a lot of trouble, or they tend to be the partiers, or they tend to be the rebels because you have that fire. Like, I probably burned a lot of people that were close to me when I was on my come up because I was a fiery person. I was like, I'm going to make my own way or else. And if I felt that you were in my way, then I was going to go through you. And that's kind of the attitude that I had. And I see that in a lot of passionate people. What was John like as the college student? You know, walk me through that stage of your life, and then let's start to talk about what happens after college.
So, yeah, there's a lot of great college stories. But first, let's just go back to getting initially dropped off. So I got dropped off, and it was this, like I said earlier, I never even visited campus. So I didn't know what Flint, Michigan was. I'm not from Michigan. I don't know the history of Flint. I didn't know I was going, like, literally, James, they took strategic pictures of the campus, right?
For sure. Hey, guys, this is what it is. And you're like, oh, I got it. That makes sense to me. What, am I lost? Am I in the wrong location?
I remember we drove through Flint to get there. And I'm looking out the window going, what the hell did I do? But my parents dropped me off, and it was kind of like, I remember watching the taillights go away, and there was like this air of excitement and nervousness, all of it, sadness, all at once, right? And I was like, well, I'm going to do this. And
stop for 1 second. You just dropped such a piece of gold. The current generation of kids is crippled with anxiety. Some of them struggle to make a phone call, John. They're terrified of any new experience. They're going to go off to college. They got to do a job interview. Everything cripples them. You have all of these new things right in front of you. You're in a town that's far from your expectations. You're about to step into this new, pathway, and yet you just said almost this, it is what it is. I'm going to have to handle it. That is what is missing from a lot of the kids that are struggling now is the strength to handle almost anything that comes up in your life resides within you. Why did you have that strength, John?
Great question. Maybe it's drive. Maybe it's. I don't know.
Why did you believe in yourself?
You know, it's funny you say it like that because what I was probably thinking at the time is there was no doubt. I knew what I was going to do. I had to do this. So it wasn't if or, oh, man, it's not what I expected. It's just, okay, this is what it is, and I got to do it. And, it's funny that you said handle it because I think one of the things that men don't get enough credit for, in today's society is we do just handle things. And as unfortunate of life circumstances they are, whatever, what other option do you have? You handle it. I had a customer call me the other day and there was an issue. Well, what am I going to do? Tell them I'm not going to handle your issue? No, you figure out what you're going to do and you handle it. So, it was kind of like maybe the first time that, I was getting what I wanted. I'm getting out of that small town, but not at all what I was expecting, right? But it was like, okay, this is a lot of anxiety, but I've got to handle it. This is the beginning, the first test of my life path.
So you get into college, you start going there, you start handling it. How does that experience unfold for you? What were the big lessons you pull from college? Were there any relationships or professors that made a huge impact? Like, were there any shaping moments in college?
So let's even start the first weekend, all right? The first weekend I get there, right after now my parents leave. The RA grabs me by the shoulder and probably sees the expression on my face of like, oh, this is real, right? And he's an immigrant from Poland, and I've got a Polish last name. And he's just like, hey, do you know how to speak Polish? And I'm like, not at all. He goes, come to my dorm room. And he goes, do you want a beer?
Oh, my God. This is awesome. I love this Polish guy right off the rip.
And what's great about this is we just went through freshman orientation where you're not supposed to have any beer in the dorms. If your RA catches you, all this stuff. And this is my RA. And he's like, yeah, it's in the fridge, right? So I'm drinking a beer with him. And then he's like, hey, there's a party at the greenhouse across the street tonight. And I'm like, in.
bro, I'm in. I mean, you're giving me beer. You're the RA. I thought I was going to get in trouble. I'm not. You're going to tell me about a party. Let's go, man. This is okay.
So me and the new friends, whatever, the people that you just met that you're like thrown into a group with, right, are like, hey, there's a party, and the ones of us that wanted to go went. Well, what I didn't know is the next day was our entrance exams.
Oh my God.
So, first time away from home, nobody telling you can't drink. Of course, and this is, talking about my experience in Flint. I'm not saying condoning this or whatever, but, there was never a time that the cops were worried about underage drinking. There's so many other problems in people's lives. Like, underage drinking is the least of their problems. We were college kids having some fun. So there was I'm only 18 years old, but I'm walking across the street and I'm drinking. And great party. Next day, my roommate reminds me, hey, there's entrance exams. And I go, what? So we get thrown into this room, and then it's like an all-day exam, math, English, whatever, all the things. And then that sets you up for what classes you're allowed to take as a freshman. So didn't do the greatest, but enough that I didn't get kicked out. We're good to go. Get all my classes assigned. Now I'm in the swing of university. My freshman year was brutal in the sense of, most of the time in college, they don't check if you're doing homework. They're not checking. They don't care if you're going to class, right? You're paying for it. And this is the first time that I had to learn self-discipline, because my first semester was horrific. I kept going back to that street or that house across the street. I was partying. I was having a great time. Every weekend, wherever the party was, I was there.
You had self-discipline for that, John. You could show up to that event.
And after my freshman year, I kind of buckled down and looked, and I said, look, this is my life goal. If I want to be successful, I've got to take this seriously. And after that, the partying.
And that came from you? Like, there was you never got threatened to get kicked out, or a teacher? Like, one day you just sat down and said, hey, time out. If I need to put my life in order and I care about these goals, I've got to get it together. You did that on your own. I
did that on my own, and there's a couple stimuluses in my life that happened around that time. So, and there's just life circumstances. My parents got divorced my sophomore year in college. And once they got divorced, I realized that the safety net was gone. There was no, hey, mom and dad, can I have $500? They were dealing with their own problems at that time. So it really came down to realizing, like, if I want this, this is on me. So I buckled down and I said, all right. Now, and James, when I say buckled down, at that time, Kettering was anywhere between 14 and 21 credit hours was considered full-time in the same price. So what I did was I took 21 credit hours a semester so I could graduate early so I could save money. So when I say buckled down, not only am I doing 21 credit hours a semester, and for those of you that I'll get into this in a second because it's important for the rest of the story, that's 21 credit hours in 3 months because they shortened their semesters because the way Kettering worked, so go back to high school to show you kind of the crazy path, is because Kettering is a co-op university. You go to school for 3 months, then you co-op at a co-op employer for 3 months, and then go to school for 3 months, and that just repeats. So because of that, I had 2 weeks between when I graduated high school and when I was in college. So I didn't have a summer vacation. I just went straight to university. But going back to the college experience, I did that because, A, it saved me money. By the time I got to my senior year, I had only 2 classes left. So then my senior year was a breeze. Then I was setting myself up for what I was looking for my career path. And then I just saved a ton of money by doing it.
So right before we shift to after college, one of the things I'm still fascinated, I'm still stuck on, is that you just figured it out. Because for as much as the secret to your evolution was you just saying, I've got to get my shit together because no one is going to do it for me. My parents aren't even going to really be able to push me through this. No one makes me go to class. Someone doesn't show up and make me, do the things that I need to do. I need to take responsibility. The craziest thing is that is the secret for anyone in the world that wants to change their life. That if they sat down and looked at their life honestly and objectively and evaluated where they're at and switched to the mindset of, I need to take action, otherwise no one's coming to save me. I can be a failure forever. I can live low level forever. I can not accomplish any of my dreams and my goals, or I can get my shit together. It's fascinating to me. I interview a ton of people, and most people normally have a major moment. They have some type of they're on the precipice of like something catastrophic, or they have a major traumatic incident, or, like a loved one dies, or they get heartbreak. And what that does is it makes them reflect. And then at that point they go like, wow, like I need to change course. And then they alter the course because they were almost like asleep behind the wheel is the best way I could describe it. They're on cruise control, they're going, something major happens and they go like, what's happening? Like, well, I need to make a left turn here. Like, this isn't right. You just figured that out. I'm really fascinated by that.
And I think some of it, James, let me go into this story because I think this will help explain maybe the mindset that I was in, is I think a little bit of it is being young and dumb and just being kind of bullheaded and I'm going to figure this out. So going back to the way Kettering works, my first co-op job was actually in North Carolina. So I went from living in Buffalo to going to Flint. 3 months later, I'm in North Carolina. And I remember that was actually one of the hardest transitions. I remember waking up in an apartment down in North Carolina. I didn't even know where I was. I was like, exactly. And what was even crazier about that is, again, going back to like, this is pre-internet. I get directions from the previous co-op student, handwritten directions. And I drive from Michigan all the way to North Carolina. And hopefully I just randomly ended up at the right apartment. I don't even know how that happened to this day. And then, I was working for that employer. They were a medical manufacturing device company. And this is where I think a big change happened because that job was horrible. And what I mean by horrible is I was working long hours, doing not at all what I wanted to do with my life. So here I moved to Michigan, now North Carolina, to pursue this goal, and it wasn't at all what I wanted to do. So, one of the big reasons that I moved to Michigan is, going back to your question earlier, I was fascinated with the auto companies. I was fascinated with these big CEOs, like a Bob, you asked about a hero, Bob Lutz. There's one for you. I mean, this guy was, I don't know if you ever met him, but he's a huge, tall man to begin with, like larger than life figure, smoking cigars. Like, I'm like, this is running these car companies. This is what I want. And I'm going, why the heck did I take a job in a medical manufacturing company? Because it was the first job available. Why did I do this? It's not what my path was.
John, you're just sitting around self-reflecting on your own, evaluating your own mind and your own life choices. You're not seeing a therapist at the time. You're not sitting down shooting the shit with a friend that's opening all these doorways. You're literally just doing the introspective work and figuring out these puzzles of your mind.
Yeah, and it was kind of like, looking back at it, was like, I don't know if it's brash youth, what the proper term would be, but it was like, I now that you're kind of, I don't even know what was going on in my head. It was just like, well, this is what I want. This is what I'm going to do. And so much how crazy this is. So I quit this co-op job, which is kind of against school policy. They want you to stay with the same co-op for the whole 5 years that you're in school. So I quit this job and I tell them I want to work in the auto industry. And the way Kettering works is they have a department called corporate relations. And corporate relations helps you find a co-op job. Well, quite frankly, and I don't hold this against them, if you quit, now they have to place all the new incoming freshmen plus you. It's a lot of work, right? So they'd really want to try to place you for your forever. So they were giving me a lot of pushback. No, you can't quit, blah, blah, blah. Ended up figuring out a solution. I quit and was looking for a job in the auto industry during my next 3-month semester. So I'm going through college, doing all this stuff, strung out 21 credit hours. And I go into my final exam week without a job. So now, like, my roommates are going, like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And, you know, there's some times in my life where I get anxious and I don't have faith that it goes away. And then other times I have to look back at examples like this and I just had faith. Like, I'm going to stick to what I want and I'm not going to take it unless it is what it is. So I go into my final exam week and one of my classes was programming. And James, I am not ever going to do a career in programming. I am not a computer programmer. Handed my test. One of the last students walking down with the professor in the elevator, and he's literally going through my test and going, well, you got that one wrong. You got that one wrong. And I'm going, oh, this is going to be a tough semester. I'm failing this class. First of all, ended up passing the class, no problem. And the next day I got a job offer from Ford. And that's really where my career path started, was working for Ford, co-oping, and them sending me through a whole bunch of training that I still use those skills today.
This is massive, and this is massive for multiple reasons. Let me try to put this into an analogy. Life had laid out a path for you with the standard process. Okay, John, when we place a student, we like them to stay with the co-op that they were placed with, you know, because it keeps things easier for us and it keeps you on track and da-da-da-da. People have to realize that if something is not right, you have to, it doesn't matter what the rules say. You almost have to say, I understand that's the norm. I understand that's the standard practice. And if I was fulfilled in this job and I was being given opportunity, I would stick it out. But your disagreeableness or your ability to be like, I'm not doing it. It opened the doorway for you to get in with Ford. The John that let's say you went back to your administration or that staff and said, guys, like, I need to leave this program. And they say, you're not allowed. That's not our process. And you go, okay. And you go back and you continue to do it. That rule follower, you may not be an entrepreneur today. If you followed the advice and the paths that were only laid before you, right? You have to climb a mountain and there's all these carved paths. But guess what? You don't get to know if those paths lead to the top or not. So you follow them because everyone else is going up them. But it takes some quality of like, I'm sorry, I don't want to give you difficulty. I'm not trying to be hard, but man, I'm taking 21 credit hours. I'm doing my best here. I'm going all in. I need to be in the automotive industry. That's where my passion is. You being relentless and having the faith. You went into the last week probably like, it is what it is, man. And that's like the attitude that you have to have sometimes. I don't know how it's going to work, but the dots are going to line up at some point. It's like if you remove that quality from your story, you're probably not the man you are today. And other people need to learn from that like, it is okay to be able to put your foot down and say like, I'm sorry, man. I understand that's the normal practice and I understand that's the way that you would like things to be, but I won't do something that doesn't fulfill me. And if I know there's another direction I have to take, I'm going to take it. And if I'm on the elevator and you're telling me I'm terrible at programming, good, because I'm not going into programming. I just got to get by because I'm going into other avenues. I don't need to be perfect at all these things. I think there's so much gold and insight in this part of your story because people often think that following the rules makes them a good person.
It's funny you bring this up, James, because it'll come out in the rest of the story. I actually excelled in my career and developed a reputation for not following rules, and that was one of the things that actually served me really, really well in my career.
To my own detriment, John, and you're probably very much like me in this way, I'm going to say this is, there's no other way to say it other than this blunt. Maybe this puts me on a checklist or a watch list or something, but like, I don't give a fuck about any rules at all. I only care about doing what's right and what is honorable and like trying to improve myself as a man and look at my shortcomings and look at my mistakes. But like, I don't give a shit what rules are written down at all. Like, I don't care. If a school policy said to me that like, well, if we place you here, you have to stay. If it's not working out, I'm going to say I'm not staying. And now if they say, well, we won't give you any other opportunity, then fine. Then I'll accept those consequences, and maybe I have to find opportunity for myself. Maybe you'll provide me no assistance. But like, I will not just follow rules because they exist. I will only follow them if they are to my benefit or they're not harming other people. Like, I'm not going to drink and drive because like I could take someone else's life. Like, I understand that. But otherwise, I'm a rule breaker to the fullest. I don't care what the rules say. I care about what is right. And if you didn't have that quality, I guarantee you wouldn't be an entrepreneur, because you have to be willing to, unfortunately, stretch some boundaries, break some rules, trust your own heart. Look at human history. Slavery was at one point legal. And if you were opposed to it, you were the outlier, right? We need to not look at rules and establishments and say like, well, I'm just subject to these rules. We need to determine what is right, what is the path that I want to follow. Is it good? Is it a good thing for me and for others and things like that? And if all those things are true, do what you believe in. And if more people embrace that spirit, I think you'd have way more fulfilled people, you know?
Yeah, and rules come in lots of forms, right? Societal norms, you look at laws, right? But even in the corporate world, there were company policies, right? So a lot of people wouldn't do things because, oh, the company policy, or we would have these standards of design standards, right? And it's like, well, why? Where did it come from? And, you know, even asking that question, I loved when I had employees working for me that they would ask that question, because the question is, I don't know. Maybe that person that came up with that rule or that guide, that whatever, that design practice was wrong. Or maybe it was developed when cars still had carburetors. Why? Why do we do that?
The word why is one of the most powerful words in the English language. If you can ask why, someone has to be able to articulate to you the reason for which you follow the process. Well, guess what? If they can't explain why, it broadens your ability to go, well, maybe there's something that we could do outside of that box that could yield the same or better result or be more efficient, right? Just because a system is in place that works doesn't mean that it's the optimal system. And asking why is one of the most, like, it's one of the easiest ways to tear apart things and say, like, does this fit the best this way? And it's a question that I've been fascinated by.
And put a different way, I always asked, what is the intent, right? Because if there's an intent like, hey, we're going to try to stop this problem, well, there might be a lot of other solutions that stop that problem. You have found one of them and you put it into law or practice, but there might be another solution.
100%. Exactly. So why is this outcome the best? Well, if you tell me it's this reason and I can produce another answer that is better, that we will have dialogue from, and you say, wow, this is objectively better, or it's more efficient, or it makes more sense, or it has more reasoning, then we should pivot and go with this route. And a lot of traditional thinking doesn't work like that. Like, people that are policy followers, they don't care if something's better. They're like, no, this says there's 27 steps, A through whatever, Z, and then a plus, and you have to do it this way. And I'm just someone that, like, if I can do it in 7 steps and get a better result, I'm going to do it.
Absolutely.
And you're the same way. So let's now start to talk about, as you progress out of college, you start to get out of college, you get to Ford, and you start to be that disagreeable man. When you're talking about these incidents, do you remember any certain times that stand out to you where you really pushed back on a company policy or under a manager that kind of introduced you to your strength? Because a lot of times that's what happens. When you stand your ground on something and then you find that you had value, you begin to trust your own instincts and intuitions. And that is a massive part about being an entrepreneur. If you can't trust yourself, how are you going to lead a ship? If I can't trust you, how can I follow you? You have to learn to trust who you are. A lot of times that comes from being able to put your foot down and stand on things. Do you remember any moments like that within Ford that really stand out?
So to give you a quick overview, and then I'll answer your question, is I went from Ford to a small engineering company called FEV, and then I ended my career at Chrysler.
Yeah, I actually knew you as a Chrysler employee.
Yeah,
That's
Chrysler.
like the story that was in my head.
So there is a great example of that when I worked at Chrysler, because by that time I was a little bit more mature, comfortable with, how to question authority in a productive way, and I think that's kind of the biggest problem is, when you're young, you come across maybe brash.
Oh, I did for sure.
and I was able to now channel that as I got older. So it actually served me really well at Chrysler. In fact, to the point of when you're talking about challenging norms, I kind of got a reputation of being a gunslinger, a cowboy. Like I had so many nicknames at Chrysler. But because of that, I actually did a transition. We can go back because I'm skipping a bunch here. But I went from standard powertrain, so engine, transmission, design, development, to electrified powertrain, so electric cars. The reason that I was put over there was because I had a reputation of getting things done. And I had that reputation of getting things done is because I didn't follow the rules. So I actually got put into that position in electrified powertrain to stir it up because it was new at Chrysler, to go fix some of the problems because of my reputation that I developed through traditional powertrain.
So think about this. You were acknowledged, rewarded, and seen for your ability to not follow the processes, but be an individual and put your creative thinking and problem-solving skills to use. The same way the kid got dropped off at college and says, it is what it is, I got to find a way to get this done. You were rewarded for not just following the processes. There's a lot of, like that's worth doing a whole meditation into for people, that like sometimes the correct answer is not to do what you're told, but to solve the problem that exists. You know what I mean? Because if you only follow the process, you're confined by it.
So to put this in perspective, and I was actually telling this to somebody the other day, I started my career at Chrysler right after all the automotive bankruptcies. I was working at the small engineering firm. They knew about me. Some Chrysler people knew about me, and they're like, hey, you're already working on a Chrysler project. Why don't you come over and work for us? And I was kind of like, man, if one of the automotive companies goes out of business, I'm out of a job, and now I'm betting on it. Chrysler? I'm like, this is probably not a great idea, but I'm like, if one of these car companies goes out of business, this whole Southeast Michigan thing is going to be done anyway. So I took the gamble. I went over there. I got another story about how I went over there in a minute, but ended up going into Chrysler. And James, the Chrysler Tech Center in Auburn Hills is I think they claim it's the second biggest building in the United States compared to the Pentagon being number one. So this is how big this complex is. And you would park out in the middle of nowhere, and you would literally walk through the building. It would be empty suite, empty suite, empty suite, because there's so little people working there after bankruptcy. So I swear you wouldn't see a person at a desk until you got to the center of the building. But because of that, it was the most rewarding part of my career in the auto industry by far, because at that point, they didn't care how you got it done as long as it got done. So at that point, it wasn't, oh, this is a process or procedure. And that's actually where I started developing my reputation, because I had this huge reputation of I got it done, and I got it done more efficiently than everybody else. In fact, what's crazy is I had a friend that had lines to management and how they would rate employees. And it's kind of gross, but literally what upper management does at automotive companies, all of them do this. They call them calibration meetings. And they literally put everybody's name on a 3x5 card, and you literally put them up on the board and you start rating people. And you rate them by how much work they do and the quality work and their contribution to the organization. And that's how their performance reviews are based. So I got feedback that I was rated at putting out the output of 2 people. So I got things done. So what was even funnier is I even said to one of my bosses at one point, I had 2 projects. I said, this is too much work. And he goes, I know, but you can handle it.
And getting recognized for that type of workload gives you a strong sense of pride. Imagine sitting in a room. Imagine if you're one of the people listening at home. You're sitting in a room around all these other people that are working for the same company, that have their own background stories, that went to colleges, different places. And they're saying to you, that man right there does the work of 2 people. The pride that you get to take in that, like, you know what? I am higher level. I do get things done. That allows you to start to trust your intuition, start to believe that you can create something that maybe many people can't create. Well, guess what? Entrepreneurs or people that start their own businesses, they have to be cut from a little bit of a different cloth, or they have to have the self-belief that they can do things differently than people. I think it's starting to make your story make sense to me, because it's starting to line up how by being that gunslinger, being that John Wayne character, being the hero of your story, not just one fish in a massive ocean that blends in with all the others, but a guy that stands out for what he brings to the table. That gets you to start going, you know what? I have something to give. I have something to offer. That young boy that thought he had something to bring to the world, hey, it's starting to get noticed now. This is starting to come to fruition.
So before I forget, let me go back to graduating from college, because we kind of skipped some area in there.
I've already decided, by the way, we're going to do a part 2 because we're at an hour long. We have that course today, so we have like 20 minutes left. And yet we're only scratching the surface, John. We're not even at your company yet. We're not at all the ups and downs
all
of
the cool stuff. Yeah,
the personal life struggles, becoming an entrepreneur, becoming successful. Like, it's going to be like Dominic's. We're going to have to shoot a part 2, but go ahead.
So I went from almost flunking out my freshman year to having that discussion. Like, what's weird is I remember it like this. I don't know if this is exactly how it happened, but I remember sitting in my dorm room, looking at my grades and going, you got to pull this shit together. Like, literally having that, like literally talking out loud to myself. And I went from that to when you graduate, you have to get above a 91 or something like that to graduate cum laude. And I graduated with a 92 average. And that is an average including that freshman year. So that's how much the grades changed from freshman year to throughout the rest of the college.
John, why did you have to get it together? When you sat in that dorm room and you said, I got to get this together, or else what? Why? What was the driving force?
I think it was a recognition that this was step one of my path. And if step one didn't happen, step two wasn't going to happen.
You could never be Bob Lutz. You could never be the man that would sit at a table one day podcasting, who's running his own company, feeling great about who he is and his place in the world, if you let this all go to waste. And it's like, you know what? You could have gone through an extreme valley and you still could have picked yourself back up. But it's like you started to say, dude, if this isn't working out, maybe this whole thing comes crumbling down.
Well, and I'm going to give you even an odder answer, is also I wasn't going back to that small town. I wasn't going to go back with my tail between my legs and said I failed. No way in hell. That was not happening. I wanted out of there.
See, that's big. That's big. You had a sense of self that you knew you were capable of more, and you knew you wanted more. And if you failed, it was going to be on you. You were going to have to go back and admit defeat. You were going to have to fall back into a standard routine. You were going to have to accept the beatings that life's given you. And you were like, no, it's not happening, bro.
Not at all.
Got it. So, yeah, so start to take me as you build through Chrysler. You're doing really well. Talk about any like pivotal moments that were at Chrysler, any big promotions, or any times maybe you developed leadership, or just anything that you pull from that part of your story. And then let's shift to the way we'll end this podcast will be, where does the idea stem where you start to go, maybe I do something on my own? Because that's a magic moment in your story. I want to know what led to that, the initial thoughts, the fears, the self-doubts. And then chapter 2 will be all about that story.
Okay, yeah. So first, let me go to working at Ford. And what a kind of cool experience that was. First of all, being a young man, finally kind of living my dream of working for a car company. In fact, as a co-op, to put it in perspective of Dominic's story. So I was working on the Mustang that was built in Flat Rock at the plant that he was working at. So, and when I was a co-op student, there was me and a friend of mine were just wasting some time walking around in the basement, and this guy comes out of nowhere. I still don't know who the heck this guy is. And he goes, hey, do you guys want to see something? We're like, sure. And we go through like this closet. Back thing, it was all gross looking, and there's like this door in the back of the closet, and we walk into this room, and it was like this white, like almost like if you could describe what heaven looked like, you know what I'm saying? Like bright, all these lights, and smack dab in the middle of the secret room was the 2005 Mustang. all in clay. So when they do cars, they do them on clay first so they can shape them, see what it looks like. And me and the guy that I was with, his name was Will, we look at each other and we're going, are we seeing this? This is nuts. And he goes, hey, what do you guys think of this car? I think what happened at the time, looking back at it, he saw two young guys and wanted feedback. He was one of the execs, and he wanted feedback on what the car was, if it was going to sell. And
what a moment, John. What a moment.
It's still, I mean, it's so cool. I mean, right? And I'm like, I remember telling people this story. I'm like, I'm in Detroit. I got to see the prototype of the 2005 Mustang. Like, this is nuts. And then I ended up working on the actual door panels. So I started off my career in body. So I actually started off in sheet metal. And flat rock is where the stamping was for that. So, and at that time, Auto Alliance was an alliance between Mazda and Ford. And that's what the Auto Alliance plant was. And so I actually was working with Mazda engineers on the Ford Mustang.
Wow, that's wild. And for the people that don't know my background story, my '03 Cobra, Mustang Cobra, it was the SVT car. That was one of my favorite cars of all time until my newest one. Honestly, like, that was a great generation. Mustang has had a really strong, heritage in the car line, but it's like to be on the forefront of that, to walk into that room. I'm picturing myself in your shoes and like seeing a prototype and in clay, like you had to feel like, wow, that is the realization of a dream of the young kid in real time. That is the movie plot. That's like you're there going, oh my God, I've done it.
Exactly. And I even remember telling my dad about this, my mom and dad, and I'm going like these are the things I dreamed of. And it really wasn't even that far removed. Like I graduated in 99. We're talking 2005, right? So, I mean, in that short period of time, I'm already where I wanted to be.
100%. And I also think this is a massive moment in your story because one of the most important moments of your life is when you get everything you originally thought you wanted. This is one of the most important moments of your life because all of a sudden you will find out, is that all that you really want? Are you actually satisfied? Or maybe is there something else? And a lot of people, I feel like they never hit that moment for the first time, John. So in their mind, it's always like, when I hit this income level, or when I get this position, or when I get that, then I'm going to be happy. I'm going to have everything that I need and I'm going to be happy. Well, a blessing and a curse will be when you hit that moment, you will find out if that statement is true.
So funny tangent here, and then maybe we do have to wrap up. I don't know where our time is, but I remember thinking that if I ever get a hot tub, I've made it. Okay?
And we can all define these happiness moments differently. In your brain, you're like, hey, when I have a house and I have a hot tub and I'm working for Ford, that's it, baby. Just send me margaritas and I'll ride off this ship into the sunset. 100% continue into this.
So I, for one of my parties, and I'll talk about this maybe the next one on why those parties happened.
John Toberfest is. I can't wait to hear about these stories, but yeah, continue.
So I decided it's time to get a hot tub. And I went on a Craigslist. I found one for $100, and the guy didn't winterize it correctly. And me and a buddy literally glued this thing back together. Okay, that was like 6 years ago. I still have this hot tub. I love it. Like, I use that thing probably, especially at the cool mornings right now. I'll go out there early in the morning, have a cup of coffee, sit in the hot tub, and I remember thinking, it took $100 to get to the point where I made it. And
but let's go to this. The first time you sat in that functional hot tub, it was one of the greatest experiences of your adult life. You were like, this is it, boys. I don't know what happiness is, but this is it.
I'm here.
I've made it. We've arrived. 100%. In our mind, we create stories. And when we can bring those stories to reality, you could be listening to this and be like, what? It's just a hot tub. When your brain attaches itself to something you're chasing and you acquire that, that's it, man. And then if you don't set new goals, you can get bummed out because all of a sudden you realize like it is just a hot tub unless you're valuing the other parts of your life. Like, it could be a great moment of your day every day, but you better be doing something that actually fulfills you.
Well, and it's also going back to, so, you said this earlier in the podcast, is when you're 80, 85, I think you said, and I look at it as I know that the material things are all temporary. When I'm 80, I want to have the best stories. I want somebody, a young man, sitting across from me asking me, hey, can you tell me a story about your life? And, this is going to get into probably the next podcast, but why I did the cage fight, why I did some of the other things that I've done in my life. And it's going to sound funny, but it's because that story, that experience going for the walk that I mentioned, that'll never be taken away from me. I have that forever.
1,000%. I tell you right now, like I have nice things in my life. I have a beautiful home. I have a beautiful car. I've got this academy. I have amazing friendships. Like I really feel like a very blessed man in this life, and a lot has worked out in my favor after some storms in my childhood. And I can tell you right now, the magic, the absolute best parts of life are the experiences and the moments that you cherish and value. It is the times with my loved ones or my friends, or when we accomplish some incredible things. We won a huge fight, or we expanded to a level that we didn't even think was possible. Or I touched down in Brazil off that plane for the first time, sitting next to Brian, gonna fight some dude in his home country. Those moments cannot be taken from you. No matter what storm comes into my life, when 2020 hit, those moments are there forever, man, and they're fuel. And I remember the value of those moments. And it's like if more people could recognize that, like, it is your experiences that are going to give you a story that you are proud of. And if you're not writing that story, I don't care what car you drive. I don't care what house you live in. If you don't write a story you're proud of, you're going to go down the wrong road. It's going to happen.
So one story that is, I don't know if you know this, James, but going back to Chrysler. I'm working at Chrysler, engineer. We're working with a supplier out of Montreal. I don't know if you know where this is going. You know what's in Montreal? TriStar Gym. So I go up there. This is 10 years ago. This is when George St. Pierre is at his peak. And I go, I'm going to go train at TriStar. And I would stay up there for usually a week at a time. So I would go up there, and I don't know if you remember David Loiseau, Miguel Torres.
Oh, 100%.
Right?
100%.
And George St. Pierre is from me to you away. Okay? I can't train with them because they were kept at that. But David Loiseau I rolled with. Miguel Torres I rolled with. And again, that experience can never be taken away.
And it also relates to the man that had that strong sense of self and felt like he was capable of doing things. Because most people, it's like, how does a gentleman that's working for Chrysler have the courage to walk into TriStar, which at the time was one of the most respected gyms on earth, with one of the pound per pound kings, George St. Pierre, and you went in there and you were like, I'm going to train with these guys because you had such a good sense of yourself. You know what I mean? And it's like not about winning or losing. It's about like, I can be in this environment too. I'm worthy of that.
I'll do you one better. Of how, I don't want to say cocky, but talk about brash, right? Is I walk in there. First of all MMA gyms are open and welcoming. We know this, right? So I knew what I was walking into. But they speak French in Montreal. So the cab driver, I literally had to give like a note to get me to, this is before Uber, to get me to the gym. And I pull up. Have you ever been to TriStar?
No, I haven't.
So TriStar is actually on the second level. So I pull up and I'm looking at this industrial complex and I'm going, I don't think this is it. And then I look up and I see the 3 stars. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like I would not have expected this is where it is. You know,
I've seen it in like UFC countdowns and stuff, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, I'm there. Get through the language. So not only I'm in a city that I don't know the language. I literally put my trust in this random guy. And then I decided to wear my Dan Henderson American flag shorts walking into the Montreal gym.
That just speaks to the man that you built yourself into. And I think actually at the start of the next podcast, we should dig more into like the moments that really gave you that fire, the times that you had to step up, the times that you were acknowledged by your team at Ford or Chrysler, the times that John was brought to light in a way that was like, I am that man. I am that guy. You know what I mean? So, yeah, we'll do a part 2 where we'll kind of pick up right from here because we haven't even got to the best juice of the story. We've only built the man that got to the level of where he started to expand rapidly.
Yeah, so many cool stories in between. And you know, one of the things that I want to talk about next time is even the mental health aspect of things. I would love to get into that. And if you don't mind, I want to read something at the end here.
1000%. Let's do it. And then I want to schedule our next one to be about a 2-hour episode because I feel like we are only just scratching the surface. Generally, I mean, we've already covered an hour and 15 minutes, but like I want to talk about the mental health. I want to talk about the entrepreneurial struggles. I want to talk about what relationship dynamics are like when you try to be a dreamer. And like there's so much to cover that maybe you and I will set aside a 2-hour window to make sure we have time. But please, the floor is yours.
So a lot of people, so you know who Lex Friedman is? So Lex always ends with a poem. I'm not a poetry guy, but I love reading into song lyrics. It's our modern day poetry. So I can tell you what this is from after the fact, but I'm just going to read a verse here, if you don't mind. Take my name, remember this face. Keep the change, have a nice day. And live for the moment, not by the past. Homie, live each day like it's your last. And if only you have 24 hours, 1,400 minutes before your dream is gone, then you better go live it. Because whatever you love could be taken away. So live like it's your dying day.
I was singing the song in my head. Like, as you read the lyrics, keep the change and have a nice day. Like, I know the song. And it's like those words, if you could pull them for the value that they are the guide. They are scripture. They are the guiding light in your life. And I'm the same way as you, where I feel like there's so many things in life that you can take inspiration from. There's so many things in life that you can look at and, you know, bring out the best of yourself in, but you have to search for them. And you have to care about the pursuit. A lot of the time, so many people that are not bringing out their greatness, they just don't realize that the greatness is there. They don't care about the process. And you are a man that cares about the process. I love that we just ended with that. There's one other thing that I want to say to the guests, because you used to say something to me and you just said it to me again recently in this building. And I think it's a perfect way to end this podcast. There was that old TV commercial that used to say, like, 80 summers. Yeah, that's all you get.
It was a NOS energy drink commercial.
And all it was it would show like a life passing by. And what was the number they used? I don't remember.
I think it was 80 summers or something like that. And I went, 80 summers? That's not enough. And even though it was this energy drink commercial, it really puts into perspective what you have in the moments that are precious.
Time is fleeting. And as you get older, those summers go by faster and faster and faster. And you start looking back and going like, I'm 30, 35 of my summers have passed and I have 45 left at the max, really?
And I mean, think about me. I'm halfway there.
100%. And it makes you, when you meditate on your death, or you think of the fact that time is fleeting and we all get one shot and we don't know if there's a chapter 2. Hopefully there is, based on your religious beliefs. Hopefully there is. But no matter what, your time is precious. And if you are spending your life not actively pursuing what you want or who you're meant to be, you're wasting your time. You're going to look back for each passing year and go, why have I not got my shit together? You know what I mean? And like, it's a perfect way to end this podcast. We might even schedule a 2.5 or 3-hour podcast next, because there is so much that I know that we can pull from your story that I want to ask you about, that I want to hear about the peaks and the valleys. And I think it lays a blueprint for people. And in a world now where we are so connected, there's so much information, everybody's showing their highlights, people are more lost than ever on what to do.
Absolutely. And even in this post-COVID remote work society, and we're being disconnected in the importance of social belonging, and yeah, there's a lot of problems today.
100%. And what I like to tell people is success leaves clues, man. And don't just look at what someone puts out. Get to know someone in your network or community or family or friend of a friend that really has their shit together. And nobody is perfect. Don't search for this idealistic person. Look for someone that is actively working to level up and try to learn from that person. If you're sitting around listening to the same music that you've listened to for the last 20 years and your life is still in a state that you're not happy with, and you're not reading books, you're not listening to podcasts, you're not sitting down for coffee with people that you care about and trying to find the weapons that you need for this life, it's no one is oppressing you. It's not the world that's keeping you from your dreams. You are holding yourself back from what you deserve. And it's like, so that's why it's like I would shoot this podcast forever for free, even if only one person ever listened to it, even if no one listened to it, because the value in seeing people almost as yourself and for what they can share is so precious. And we've gotten away from it, even though all we see is other people's stories. When you go on Facebook or Instagram, all you see is person's picture, poem, this, that, blah. Versus back in the day, you know how you had to find out about somebody? You had to talk to them.
And even something I said to you before our podcast is, Facebook, false book, whatever you want to call it, right? You're putting out there the things that you want people to see. And that's one of the things I even told you beforehand. You can ask any question, and let's get into the negative stuff because people's stories aren't all what you see on Facebook.
And honestly, most of the best insight is from the moments that are still painful, that still burn when they think about it. Those times where they came up short and decided they had to do better. The times where they had their heart ripped out and they had a chance to fall into alcoholism or going all into worse decisions, or they had to change their trajectory. And it's like those are the moments where you really reveal the gold. That's where the treasure map lies. Those are the things that put you on track.
And I was thinking about this when I was driving here, is even the fact that you get to talk to people and what you're learning. I understand why you say that you do it for free, because these conversations, you can learn so much.
John, when I'm sitting at home working, a lot of times I'll play my own podcast just to almost listen to it like a third party and hear the exchange and find, have you ever I know this has happened to you. You listen to a song 100 times and you know the lyrics and you understand the song, or at least you know them on the surface. And then you have almost like a breakthrough with it where you're like, there's more depth here than what I even realized before. It's almost like when your frequency gets in tune to really receiving a message in the fullness of its capability, then you perceive it. That is so true of reading, of podcasts, of general conversation. I can't tell you how many times I've gone back and I'll listen to an episode that was 50 episodes ago, and I'm like, wow, there was such good insight that this guest said to me, and it takes me on a whole different level of thinking. And you know what? I appreciate those times with those people because we're all so busy now. We're always running from thing to thing to thing. And it's like if we just shared with each other more and built our communities a little bit tighter and better, the whole world is brighter than it seems. You're not as isolated as you think. You're not as, separate from the things you need to achieve your goals as you actually might believe yourself to be. It's probably a few conversations away. It's probably a few lifestyle choices away. It's probably a few actions with your decisions and discipline and accountability from coming to fruition. So these conversations, you know what I'm saying? Those that seek will find. And that's why I do this. So we'll wrap this episode up. We're going to schedule we got to schedule 2 hours for that. So 3 hours, John. I'm telling you, we just got to free a day. Maybe we got to free a Sunday, bring in some drinks and sit down and be able to go because I'm fascinated by what we've said so far, and I can't wait to hear more. So if there's anything else you'd like to say today, go ahead, put it on the podcast, then we'll wrap this episode up. And then I'd like to, in the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, somewhere in there, let's schedule part 2.
Nothing more for today. I can't wait for the next conversation because you're right. I feel like we just scratched the surface because I really want to get into, the cage fighting aspect of things. And, one of the things you talked about is going back to the 80 summers or whatever, right? Is one of the things that I have enjoyed thoroughly with the young guys is I'll be pushing them against the fence and pounding on them and going, you want to be an MMA fighter and some engineer's beating on you? I want to go into really the mixed martial arts journey and where that started for me and even share with people the history that a lot of people don't realize where a lot of the young kids don't know where it started from and what we went through as being pioneers in the sport, and how much, and I think the biggest thing I want to talk about is how much that has impacted my life in a positive way.
100%. And I'll tell you what, if you have fire in your chest and you see fire in other people, and especially if you can help ignite that flame, it's a very rewarding thing because you see people as you're like, oh man, I remember that fire in the chest. You got to make them push through that. You know what I mean? Watching my fighters come to life and bring out their best reminds me of what martial arts did for me. Martial arts healed my mind and made me the person that I am. Martial arts was the vehicle through which I combated the darkness and got the chip off my shoulder and the things that were holding me back. And then now that I can give that to others and watch them step into their power, you know how many powerful people we have in here. We are creating an army of incredibly self-actuated, like autonomous monsters. We got savages in here. And it's like there's so much correlation between going through the martial arts journey and the correlation to getting yourself in order as a human being. So this will be part 1. I cannot wait for part 2, John. I appreciate you sitting with me here today, and we'll wrap this up.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it.
Thank you, brother.